Hello and good evening, everybody. My name is Liz Vallee. I am the candidate for the People's Party of Canada representing Chatham-Kent, Leamington. You are watching the People's Forum. The People's Forum is a platform for the people. We provide everyday people with a voice and a platform so that their stories and their issues can be heard. Tonight, we actually are going to mix things up a little bit and do something a little bit different. We're providing you, the people, with a special show. I have a very special guest on this evening, and his name is Randy Hillier. Welcome, Randy.
Good evening, Liz. Pleasure on the World Wide Web.
Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We really greatly appreciate it. And we promise to be patient with your internet. Randy is out in the middle of nowhere and internet can be spotty. So everyone please be patient. But this is going to be a very special show. So the first question I have for you, Randy, we're coming into election time. We've already started early polls and it's well underway. What, in your opinion, is the biggest issue we are facing as Canadians and as Ontarians?
Well, it's very simple, Liz. Like, this is the most profound election in the lifetime of anybody who is alive in Canada today. This is all it just an election is to downplay the importance. On September 21st, Canadians are going to wake up either in a free democratic country with the PPC having won a significant number of seats, or they're going to wake up to a full-on path and embracement of medical segregation, tyranny, authoritarianism, communism, however you might want to, whatever adjective you may want to use. We're either going to wake up in darkness if Canadians vote for any one of those four major parties, or we're going to wake up free as free Canadians in a free country. So this is that is the question that has to be the ballot question throughout Canada is are we going to wake up to these mandatory vaccines, mandatory vax passports, or in further restrictions and lockdowns that never end? That's the question in my view, anyway.
Yes, I agree. And it's something that I've been talking about over and over and over again, that we are fighting for our basic human rights and freedoms at this point in time. And it's extremely important, and everything is riding on this election and the way that we vote. And one thing I've said is you can vote for us to keep going on the same path we've been going on, only to get actually worse, or you can vote for freedom. So you mentioned the vaccine passports. Can you elaborate on how you mentioned a lot of things there? How is the vaccine passport going to lead us down a dark road and a road towards something like communism?
Well, it should not surprise anybody. Just let's connect the dots, not just of the last 18 months, which are important, but the dots that all our major political players have laid out for us. When Justin Trudeau says that you are too dangerous, too contagious, too risky to board a train or a plane, let's not be surprised that next month you'll be too dangerous, too risky to go into a school or a supermarket or even a hospital. And we saw that in Australia this past weekend, where Australia has announced that people who are unvaccinated will be prohibited from accessing medical care in the hospitals. Like that is the only way this thing goes forward when you adopt that mentality. Um, so you know, that a month ago, Doug Ford here in Ontario said, mandatory vaccines and vaccination passports will not be implemented here because they would be unconstitutional. And then the following week, he brought out the rule that made it mandatory for healthcare workers to get vaccinated. And then he brought it out mandatory that anybody attending university or working on a university campus would need to be vaccinated. And now we're seeing all our minor recreational sports facilities and leagues like hockey and soccer, etc., for our children now are implementing mandatory vaccine policies. So, and I would say to the people listening, to coerce, to intimidate, and to compel people to make a choice between their life and their life is not what happens in a free and democratic society. Maxime Bernier and the PPC party are the only party who is opposed to the mandatory vaccines, opposed to the vaccine passports. So, there is no exit strategy, and that we haven't had an exit strategy from COVID for 18 months. All the major political parties are heavily invested in this narrative of fear and danger and terror. And they must continue to bring out ever more restrictions, ever more unlawful mandates in order to combat that narrative of fear. So to me, it's obvious, just as we were told originally that let's just restrict our personal freedoms for 2 weeks, so we don't overwhelm our hospital. And that 2 weeks grew into a month, and then that temporary restriction to not overwhelm our hospitals grew into mandatory face mask laws, and then it turned into continued lockdowns, and then a second lockdown, and a third lockdown, and then it grew into the arbitrary stop and demands on individuals of if they were permitted to be outside, and the closure of our borders with our provinces, and the restrictions with government saying that you couldn't have people over for Thanksgiving dinner or Christmas, and now it's into vaccines, and it's into vaccine boosters, and now it's into vaccine passports. People need to realize in the last 18 months, this has been the path that we're on, and these trends will continue to get worse and darker unless we have the resolve, the courage, the fortitude, and the honesty to say enough is enough. I'm voting for freedom. I'm voting for the PPC, voting for Liz Vallee, for the fortunate people in Chatham-Kent, Leamington, and voting for Maxime Bernier for coast to coast, from Newfoundland, Vancouver.
So I have a question for you. You represent, you're one of our MPPs in the province. You are an independent. You see a lot more within the government than myself being a candidate, and then obviously than regular citizens. And you are privy to information that maybe the rest of us don't have access to, or don't get, or don't see. So you mentioned recreation, sports, and things like that. I've made it known to the public that I'm dealing with the hockey leagues demanding that my son, my 12-year-old son, have a vaccination in order to play. What dangers do you see, not just in the form of tyranny, but in the form of medicine, you would be handed a lot of information coming from medical experts being in the position you are in. What concerns do you have when we start demanding that our children be vaccinated?
Well, listen, first off, we know this, the data evidence clearly demonstrates beyond any reasonable doubt that children are neither at risk from COVID, nor are they at risk of. That is a fact. The fact is clear that for those people who are at risk are the people who have significant and complex and chronic illnesses, any of them, who are living out the last days of their long-term care facility. That's who is at risk from COVID. Okay? For everybody else, it is pretty much like the flu, right? And even for those people in long-term care and the people that are vulnerable, as I just described, they are also at risk from the flu every year. Right? When you are, not to be crass, not to be crude or anything, but when you are in that situation in your life, when you are near the end of your, it doesn't take a lot to, a feather can knock you off, and you know, put you into your days, and that's, we know that's true. So to now demand of young children who are not at risk to take a vaccine that was rushed, and I have hesitation in calling it a vaccine, Liz, because even our medical authorities have said you can still contract COVID if you're vaccinated. You can still spread it if you can still get ill if you're vaccinated. So it doesn't meet any of the legal definition of the word vaccine. And I would even add this: we have seen in this week's data out of the UK that 89% of the people with COVID in the UK are people who are double vaccinated. So clearly, it is not effective. But this injection, whatever it is, has never been thoroughly tested. It has never been thoroughly evaluated on its long-term. So to put little children to an unknown risk versus something that there is no risk is foolhardy at best. It is tragic and criminal at worst. Yes, like, for your audience, I've been in the legislature for 14 years. I've seen how politicians and political parties operate, and I'm not always very pleased with what I see in political parties. And and I'll say this to your whole audience: political parties do not make decisions in the best interest of the people. Parties are singularly focused on the best interest of the political party. They are singularly looking at how can they be reelected. And so for anybody who is watching, who thinks your government is thinking about you and the impacts and the consequences on you, well, you're living in Shangri-La. You're living in utopia. That's not the real world. The only thing that government is looking at is how can they get your vote so that they can be reelected.
Wow. Yeah. I've always thought that. I've always had this opinion of not liking politicians, which is really ironic since I am one now. But it's the truth. And I I'm like mind blown that people all of a sudden trust the government and trust everything they're saying and doing. To me, it appears blindly. In some cases, people are trusting, and I think to myself, since when? Since when do we just blindly follow what the government tells us to do? It just makes no sense to me. And we're putting our children at risk. It was one thing when it was us adults, right? But to put our children, the data came out that children fare worse from the flu, from influenza, than COVID. And for all of those people out there who have never even thought about getting their child a flu shot, all of a sudden you're being forced and coerced and manipulated into getting your child this brand new technology and injecting it into them. And I don't understand why anybody is accepting that, and trying to tell somebody like me, a mom, that I have to inject my child in order for him to play hockey. It's absolutely evil and asinine, in my opinion.
Well, let me bring up two parts of that. One is, yes, our whole parliamentary system is based on the premise that you cannot trust government. That is why we have all these checks and balances in the system. That the executive branch is supposed to be held in constraint by the legislative branch. Both branches are to be held in constraint by the judicial branch. Then there is the independent oversight of it by the media. What we've seen is that the legislative branch is too cowardly, too chicken. They are fearful of being removed from their caucus if they speak out against the executive, in this case, the premier or the prime minister. The media have been clearly bought off by the Liberal Party's $1 billion slush fund that they started 2.5 years ago. And the media are so willing to distort the truth and suppress honesty because they do not want to bite the hand that is feeding them of that slush fund. And so there's many problems here, but the system is designed knowing that we ought not to ever trust government, that we have all the branches in place to prevent them from abusing their power. And in the last 18 months, we've thrown them all away. I would add to your final point about your son and many others. Last Friday in the Toronto Sun, Joe Warmington ran a story of, at that point, so that was just over a week ago, that there was over 100 young boys in our Toronto hospitals with permanent heart damage as a result of the vaccine. Okay? That's what the government was willing to acknowledge. And again, these are young boys, young men who were never at risk from COVID, who are now in a hospital bed and who have permanent heart damage. And I know many of them would have been taking that injection thinking that this will free them. Well, you're not very free if you've got permanent heart damage and you're in a hospital bed and never going to be able to play hockey or soccer or baseball again. So, now does it happen to everybody? Not yet, not as far as we know, but it's happening to a great many people been at risk at all. So, for our government's medical procedure that I've ever come across in the history of humanity that is not being taken by people because they're fearful of a disease or an illness. It's being taken in a false belief that freedom can be obtained through this injection, that they can now live their life normally again. And I'll say to you, Liz, freedom is found by defending it. Freedom is found by asserting it. Freedom is found within. It can never be found through an injection of any kind.
So, 100, over 100 boys. It breaks my heart when I see stuff like that. And, and then people try to justify it and say, well, this is how many actually got the injection. And so, statistically, it's not even that high. And they'll say crazy things like that. And I think to myself, well, then how many is too many? How many children do we have to injure until we take this seriously? And,
statistically, it is very high. It is 1 in 3,800. That's what we're seeing so far. And, that's an astonishing number. And okay, maybe some parent might say, well, my child was one of the 3,799. But think of it as the mom or dad, of the 1 in 3,800. Like, this is a terrible tragedy, but more than just a terrible tragedy, it was unnecessary because it was 1 in a million that may be of risk, and even more than that. The odds of somebody that age getting COVID was, it was not measurable. It was so small.
Okay, so speaking of that, you have read those statistics, so am I, but I would like you to share the children from, let's say, ages, I believe it's ages 12 to 25 that have that higher risk of myocarditis. But even let's just say, children 12 to 18, would you say that they are at higher risk of having a bad outcome from the vaccination statistically from the stats that would you say they have a higher risk of a bad outcome from the vaccination or from COVID?
Well, it's clear, that it's 1 in 3,800 kids, and it's like 1 million for COVID. So take your, I'm going to take the 1 in a million chance rather than the 1 in 3,800 chance. There's no comparison, and numbers statistically as well are much higher as well for not just that 12 to 18 group, but for everybody under the age of 50. And I can tell you, Liz, just from a personal, I know far more people who have suffered significant, serious, debilitating adverse effects than I know of people who would be for COVID. And I think if everybody in your listen to this, ask themselves that question. Do you know more people who have had serious effects from the vaccine or from COVID? And I think, unquestionably, everybody will come up on the same side of that coin. I know people who have been diagnosed with COVID, but the greatest many of them had no symptoms or any illness. So, but this is not about. I think we should understand this. This has never been a health crisis. This is a political crisis that we're facing, and our governments want us to believe this narrative of fear and danger and that it's a medical crisis, but it never has been. Never been a health crisis. If it had been a health crisis, we would not have told people not to go outdoors and walk in parks and made that unlawful, but tell them that it was okay to go to coffee in the beer store. Like, that just wouldn't have happened. We would not have Um, you know, and there's so many. We wouldn't have kept our provincial borders closed. Well, we closed our international borders. Like that, you know, the last 18 months has been a contradiction of the greatest magnitude, of the highest order. Uh, to think that wearing a mask is going to prevent the transmission of a virus is the height of stupidity. Uh, all the studies have shown this, you know, without question. This is a political crisis started with a great deal of disinformation, a great deal of uncertainty, a great deal of misinformation, and exact predictions and models. But the facts and evidence are pretty clear. Um, you know, what is really at play here is Canadians, and indeed most people in the Western world, now realize that in our society today, it is dangerous to be truthful. It is risky and really dangerous to be honest. Um, and you saw that in spades in your own writing, Liz, with my former colleague Rick Nichols. For 17 months, I watched his press conference, and I'm sure you did as well. For 17 months, he stated that he had been pleading with the government over the harm that these COVID measures were causing his community. And he even went on to say that the toll that they were taking on. But for 17 months, he continued to support the measures that were causing harm to his family and his community. And it wasn't until 17 months later that, when faced with taking this injection himself, that he stood up and said, "Enough is enough." And I'm glad Rick has done that. But he knew, and so many other people in politics know, that what we've been doing is wrong and harmful, but they have not been able to find the courage yet to stand up and be truthful and honest with the people in our country.
100%. Uh, it's awful. And okay, so you um, pretty early on had decided to help create the group No More Lockdowns and the No More Lockdowns caucus. This is something I loved immediately as soon as I heard about it. You guys started this, a group of you started this and got into the No More Lockdowns caucus. Can you kind of tell us, for the viewers that don't really know as much maybe about it as some of us, and I know that you guys are involved in some lawsuits, some actions, towards some of these measures and things like that. So could you kind of give us maybe a brief up to date and maybe a little bit of a background on No More Lockdowns, and then an up to date on where you're at now?
Well, we have a lot of things underway. Nothing is as important as the election on September 20th. That is the only way we are going to end the political crisis, is at the ballot box. And if we don't, as I said, it will get. But I'm optimistic that we will end this madness on the 20th. The End of Lockdown Caucus and No More Lockdowns are similar. They have similar objectives. And one of the things that I realized early on was this fear, apprehension by people. I knew a great many people who were opposed to these, but they did not feel comfortable in their to be public, be vocal, in opposing this. So the No More was was predicated on that very basis of giving people the confidence they could not only speak out, but also find others who were willing to speak out. And we did it in a very gradual process. And one of the first initiatives was to provide signs to people that they could put on their front yard that said no more lockdowns. And this was a mild way of stating an opinion without getting into a confrontation, without getting into any aggressiveness, but you could just put a lawn sign on your yard that says, I'm opposed to lockdowns. And it's been very effective. And of course, it's been very effective, Liz. And a great many people joined. And the End of Lockdown Caucus was an extension of that, but into the political realm. Because again, I knew a great many elected people who knew that this was wrong, but they needed a forum where they could speak out together with others and have that confidence that they could withstand the scorn, the ridicule, the shaming of this woke, idiotic cancel culture that we have so thoroughly adopted in our country. So that, the very first End of Lockdown Caucus was 5 members: myself, Maxime Bernier, Derek Sloan, Daryl Herlick, and Steve Van Leeuwen. And of course, that's grown substantially as well. And it's been very involved in the freedom movement, the No More Lockdown movement, politically with the People's Party as well. So this was just a recognition that again, it was dangerous to be honest in our country, dangerous to be outspoken or vocal or public in our opposition to the dogma, unless people knew that there was other like-minded people. So it's been very effective, and I think in large part it will help. It will be seen as a trigger that and seen as a factor in this great wave, this great purple wave that is washing over our country right now, this great purple wave of freedom, which I am confident we will see the result on September 24th.
Randy, Liz got kicked off the broadcast. I'm your behind the scenes guy, so I'm going to jump in here until she manages to log back in on the internet.
Usually it's me that they gets kicked off.
I'm sure she'll be back online in a moment. How do you see the polls affecting people's mindset as they go to vote? It seems like some of these polls are maybe a little inaccurate.
Well, listen, polling can be used either as an accurate snapshot, or they can be used in a manipulative way, and I've seen them done both. I think I can say and demonstrate that polls are not only being used in a manipulative way, but they're also in an inaccurate way. And for your audience, let me state it this way. In Canadian politics, a full 40% of the people who have the franchise to vote, who have the guaranteed right, never exercise their right to vote. And that's an important number for people to understand. The 60% of people who generally vote, the pollsters look at that group. They also look, I'll say this to your audience. I get calls from pollsters all the time because I always answer their calls. So I get an inordinate number of requests to participate in surveys. And pollsters are, they're just like everybody else. They go to where there's a willing um, customer base. If so, a great many never participate in polls either. So once you hang up on a pollster once or twice, well, they put your phone number in. They're not going to return your call, and they only call those people who are likely to respond. So the pollsters are not seeing this great number of Canadians who now see this election in such profound importance that 40% of the population who are seeing that their freedom, their way of life, their culture, their their children's future is now in jeopardy, and they're getting involved in a big way, but they're unseen to the pollsters. Uh, I would also say, it was only 2 weeks ago I had a survey pollster which even gave me the option to select the PPC. Most pollsters are not giving the PPC as a viable option. They're just saying other. Um, so, and then there's one other aspect of the polls which I believe are skewing things. Even though we're seeing the polls continuing to rise daily, the PPC is rising every day um, at the expense of others. Um, but, you know, we know, as I said earlier, there's a lot of people who are very, very hesitant, very apprehensive to be public in identifying their opposition to the COVID measure. They're also hesitant and reluctant to indicate that to a pollster as well. They will hang up or say undecided. I think the best example of how distorted the polls are right at the moment, Liz and Rick, is this. And it was 3 weeks ago, Nova Scotia provincial election. Was a lady there who was running as an independent candidate. And previously she had been elected to office because she had attended rallies and had spoken out against lockdowns. She was promptly caucus. Surprise, surprise. There. But she had the fortitude and the resolve to run as an independent candidate in that election. And last poll before election day pegged her at 8% in the polls. And of course, when all the votes were counted that night, she had over 50% of the vote. That was that great silent majority, that great number of hesitant to be public people, the great number of Canadians know this election is profound and important. In the privacy of the ballot box, they're free to judge, vote their conscience, what they could not do out in the public. So I am very excited about this election. I'm very optimistic about it. I am confident in saying on September 21st, we will have made Canada free again.
Yes. Yes. So just what Randy's saying right there, guys, let that be a lesson right now. So what he was saying about out east, that absolutely happened 100%. It was so exciting, so amazing to see something like that happen. The underdogs can win. We're not the underdogs because we are the ones that are the warriors. We're the ones fighting. We're the ones that stand up and be brave when other people cannot do it. So don't fret, don't worry. Like Randy said, when you go into that ballot box, you are there by yourself voting. Nobody gets to influence you, nobody gets to coerce you, nobody gets to have a say. It's your say. So you go in there and you vote for the future that you want. And that gives us hope. And I'll get Randy to kind of comment on this, but I've recently been saying it and I'm going to say it again. The amount of support that we openly see in Chatham-Kent Leamington for me, for Liz Vallee, is absolutely astronomical. It is amazing. It is heartwarming. It is blowing up. And there are still people who aren't as vocal. And that silent majority is becoming silent no more. So just remember when you go to the ballot box that you are surrounded by many, many, many like-minded people who just want their freedom back. Would you concur with that, Randy?
Absolutely, without question. And I'll add this final point. I think people need to realize that when they go into the ballot box, the ballot that they look at will not have Trudeau's name on it. It will not have O'Toole's or Max's name or Jack Singh. In Chatham-Kent, Leamington, they're going to see Liz Vallee's name on it. People go into the ballot and they must, if the vote is to be a representation of your desires and you vote for the person who most closely aligns with your values, objectives, and your vision. And so this idea of vote splitting is just horrible nonsense. Okay, people go into the ballot box and vote for Liz Vallee if they want freedom. You vote for any one of the other four if you don't want freedom. Okay, and where the PPC and freedom is really situated right now, in most of our riding in Canada, it's a four-way race, right? It's 4 or 5 candidates are going to be on that ballot, and you don't need to win in your riding. In a 4 or 5-way race, 30% will often win that seat. And we know from all the government's numbers, and this was going back a month or so ago, and these numbers have exploded since. There's at least 6.5 or 30% of the electorate who is opposed to these measures, right? And 6.5 million people is a lot of people. Justin Trudeau won the last election votes. So the math is pretty simple here. If people get off the couch and vote their conscience, vote for freedom, we will have it. And, put it at a very local level, Liz, you're running against a conservative. I'm sure you're running against a liberal, an NDP, a Green. There may be others. And, probably about 20,000 people in your community will decide if we are a free country. They have a representative who demands and advocates for freedom and a future for their children and their grandchildren.
That is very well put. Very well put. Before I let you go, can you tell us briefly what your future is going to be looking like? Because I know you have a lot of fans out there, and a lot of people that I know really love you, and they've been curious. They've been curious to what you're up to and what you're going to be up to in the future.
Well, in the short term, I'm heading down to Southern Ontario on Tuesday. I'm going to be with Max doing our big Great Canadian Comeback Tour starting on Wednesday morning in Sarnia, traveling through. We'll be in your riding as well on Wednesday, Liz, and we're going to end up that night at my daughter's Elgin, Middlesex, London. My daughter is a candidate in Elgin, Middlesex, London. Then I'm off to Toronto with Max for a full day of events, and then out to Calgary on Friday, events in Calgary. But listen, after we get problem fixed at the federal level, I've got work to cut out at the provincial level. But in addition to that, I will say, Max talked. I'm going to continue supporting the PPC and Max. I've been asked, and I will, for those elected members of the PPC on September 20th. I've been asked to provide some advice, guidance, and mentorship to the members of the PPC party who are elected. So, I see continued a strong relationship with Max and the PPC party, as well as seeing if we can get rid of Doug Ford in after September 20th as well.
Well, that's quite exciting. Awesome. So I just want to repeat that that was all extremely exciting, but I'm going to be selfish for a minute and repeat that Randy is on the tour with Max, which means he is going to be in Chatham at the Ultimate Sports Bar when Max is here, and he will be taking full participation in the rally that we have planned out. So I am quite pumped up about that. So not only do we get our incredible leader, Maxime Bernier, but we get Randy Hillier as well. So I am definitely going to take full advantage of that and be extremely happy and excited, and let our community members know that they get to meet you again as well. Wow. So is there any last thought you want to leave the community before we sign off?
Do whatever you can. Go out, get a sign, put it in your yard, call Liz up in your campaign, and if you've got a couple hours to deliver some flyers in the neighborhood or deliver lawn signs, this is the time for Canadians to stand up, to stand tall, and make a comeback, and make sure that freedom is entrenched for all of us. And I look forward to seeing you throughout all the trip in Southern Ontario and in Chatham-Kent on Wednesday.
Excellent, Randy. Thank you so much for coming on. I am honored to get to interview you tonight. I really appreciate you taking the time. I know you're extremely busy, so I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. But it's time to go. The mosquitoes are starting to come out.
I know. Yes. Okay. Have a great night and get out from the bugs.
Bye-bye now.
Bye. Well, that was quite the exciting interview. As you heard it, Randy Hillier is going to be coming on the tour with Max and coming into Chatham. And, I really, aside from that is very exciting. And I'm honored to have interviewed him tonight. And I am honored to have him part of the tour and have him coming to Chatham. I really want you to focus on his words tonight and what he said. Again, I'm going to reiterate the fact that being an MPP as he is and being independent, he sees things and he hears things that we are not privy to. And he gets information coming from all different angles, and people provide him with lots of stats, lots of science, lots of other information. And when he's speaking and he's talking about what's going on here, we need to listen. And he's trying to tell us something. And the bottom line is exactly what he said. When you go to the ballot box, when you're looking at those other parties, they're all together. They even said it in a commercial. They're all in this together. They're all the same. You can vote for continuing on with all of this that's been happening, all this same, the tyranny, the passports, the infringements on our rights and freedoms. But if freedom is of value to you, if your rights and your children's rights are of value to you, you only have one choice to make. And that one choice is the People's Party of Canada. And here in Chatham-Kent, Leamington, I am the only candidate. I am the only candidate that stands up, that's been standing up all along for our rights and freedoms. I am the only candidate that talks about your children and their safety from government tyranny and coercion. I'm the only one. So there is really only one choice here. Please vote Liz Vallee, PPC, strong and free. Thank you and have a great night.